Alright, what's up guys? I thought it would be a good idea, just because it's almost Halloween, tomorrow is Halloween, to share a spooky bird story with you guys. For a few years I lived in Mexico, and there are a lot of urban myths and legends in the country of Mexico and in a lot of the various different states that are found within. I lived in a state called Guanajuato, and one of the stories that's pretty widespread is of La Lechuza. Essentially what this story is, it's about buos, also known as owls in the English language, and how witches would transform into owls. And one particular witch was known as La Lechuza. So let's get into this story.
Lights stay flickering, the candles glitter like you're in a thriller. Heart goes pound, pound, pound.
In the small, dusty town of San Mateo, everyone knew the legend of La Lechuza, the witch who could transform into an owl. The story was passed down through generations and through families, whispered amongst families to never go outside at night, especially when the wind carried a strange, screeching call. They said La Lechuza was a bruja, a powerful witch who once lived amongst the people. But after a betrayal, she was banished to the outskirts of town. Vowing revenge, she learned dark magic, which helped her transform into a large owl with glowing red eyes. She would soar through the skies at night, searching for anyone who had wronged her or any soul that wandered out into the dark. One such night, a young man was visiting his grandmother who lived in San Mateo. He scoffed at the old stories and thought that they were ridiculous. But his grandmother was adamant La Lechuza was real, and he should take these things very seriously. "Stay inside tonight, mijo," she warned him, as he mentioned that he wanted to go out into the dark and see for himself. The wind began to screech and to howl outside, and she warned him, "Stay inside, La Lechuza is hunting." Javier smiled and kissed his grandmother on the cheek and promised her that he would stay inside, but his heart belonged outside to see if these things were actually real. He slipped out of the house and the wind began to howl, but he ignored the tightening feeling in his chest that was beginning to take place. The wind carried with it a distant screech. The streets were abandoned, and as he wandered down the winding roads, the wind grew stronger, and then he heard it, a screech breaking the silence in the night. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. He continued walking, unease growing in his stomach. Another screech echoed through the air. He looked around frantically, wondering where the sound was coming from. His breath became faster, fogging into the air, and as he rounded a corner, he froze. Perched atop a large adobe wall was the largest owl he had ever seen. Its wingspan seemed impossibly wide, and looking back at him were two glowing, fiery red eyes. "La Lechuza," he whispered to himself as his heart began to beat and race faster than it had ever raced before. Before he could react, the owl launched itself into the air, claws blazing. It began to glide towards him, and he turned around and ran as fast as he could back to his grandmother's house. He glanced back and saw the owl gliding towards him, its wings not making a sound, its claws outstretched, ready to grab Javier if he let himself slow even a pace. He raced towards his grandmother's house, the creature closing in with each step that he took. As he reached the door, he fumbled with the latch, frantically trying to open his grandmother's door. Just as he pushed the door open and fell inside, closing the door behind him frantically, he heard a crash and scratching at the door. His grandmother appeared, her face pale in the moonlight. I told you not to go out," she screamed. They both listened quietly as the sound of scratching and scraping and screeching echoed from outside. The Lechuza was circling the house, trying to get in. His grandmother grabbed a handful of salt, spreading it across the floor, and whispered a frantic prayer. "The Lechuza cannot enter this house," his grandmother said. "We are safe here." The screeching began to grow louder and more furious, but eventually over time, it began to fade as La Lechuza departed as sunrise started to come over the mountains. He looked out the window and saw the creature departing and could not help but feel a chill cross his bones. That night, he didn't sleep, but the next morning he wandered outside to find claw marks etched into the door. From that day forward, he never scoffed at the old stories ever again, vowing never to return to San Mateo after dark. But one thing never left his memory, the memory of those glowing red eyes. They say the Lechuza still roams the skies of Mexico, searching for those who wander too far at night out into the darkness. And if you listen closely, you can still hear the screeching through the wind.